Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Doris sat across from Teresa in their favorite cafe, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee. A faint smile lingered on her lips, the kind that stuck around after laughing at one of Teresa's stories, but her eyes seemed distant. Teresa, sensing something was off, leaned in closer. "All right, what's going on with you and Caleb?" Teresa asked, giving Doris a knowing look. Doris sighed, setting her spoon down. Everything's fine. Caleb's a good husband. We've been married, almost 7 years now. She paused, tracing her fingers along the edge of her mug. But sometimes, I feel like there should be more. More than just this. Teresa raised an eyebrow. More? Doris nodded slowly. Exactly. It's like we're just in a comfortable routine. Caleb thinks everything is perfect, but I need something exciting again. Teresa's eyes sparkled with interest. Well, I've been trying something new myself. She lowered her voice and leaned in a little. Have you ever thought about opening things up a bit? Giving yourself the chance to explore other people? Doris's eyes widened in surprise. Wait, are you serious? Completely, Teresa said with enthusiasm. My husband and I talked about it, and honestly, it's been great for us. Just a little freedom to be ourselves and feel that thrill again. It doesn't have to mean anything serious, just a little space to breathe. And it's actually brought us closer. Doris felt a mixture of nervous excitement and doubt. But how do I even bring something like that up? Caleb would never expect it from me. He'd think I've lost my mind. Just be honest, Teresa advised gently. Tell him how you feel. It's not about him, it's about you. Who knows, he might be open to it. Sometimes a little change is exactly what you both need. Doris took a deep breath, glancing out the window. She hadn't realized that this one conversation, this one decision to open a door, was about to change her marriage and her life forever. She leaned in closer to Teresa, her voice barely a whisper over the cafe's hum. So, how do I even start that conversation? Teresa smiled, her gaze steady. Honestly, you just have to be direct. Men appreciate that more than we think. If you tiptoe around it, he'll just get confused or suspicious. Doris furrowed her brow. But what if he thinks I don't love him anymore? Teresa shook her head. It's not like that. You're not rejecting him. You're just sharing your feelings. Be honest with him. Tell him how much you love him, but that you need a little freedom to feel alive again. If you frame it right, he'll understand that it's about you needing growth, not about him not being enough. Doris let out a slow breath, nodding. All right. So, I tell him I want to feel more free, more alive, and maybe he'll understand that it's not just about us. She bit her lip. But Caleb's never been the type to go for anything unconventional. He's all about stability, Doris murmured. Teresa gave her a reassuring pat on the hand. If he loves you, Doris, he'll listen. And honestly, if he's supportive, that's your answer right there. It shows he's willing to work with you, even if it's a little unusual. Just trust him, and trust yourself. The next evening, Doris sat across from Caleb at their dining room table, her heart pounding as she mentally rehearsed her words. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, before speaking. Caleb, there's something I've been thinking about, she began, her voice steady but soft. Caleb looked up, giving her his full attention. What's on your mind? He asked. Doris paused, gathering her courage. I've been feeling, I don't know, a little restless. Not because of us, really, but because of me. I feel like I need to experience more in life, Caleb listened quietly, his expression thoughtful, but he didn't interrupt. I guess, Doris continued, I've been wondering what it would be like if we, I don't know, gave each other a little freedom in our marriage. To explore things we haven't explored before. She watched him carefully, hoping to see some understanding on his face. It's not that I don't love you, Caleb. I just feel like we might both benefit from a little room to breathe. Caleb was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he nodded slowly, his gaze calm. So, you want us to open things up? He asked, his voice steady. Doris's heart raced as she nodded. Just for a while. Just to see what it's like. I think it could be good for us. Caleb considered her words, his gaze unwavering. I see, he said softly, but firmly. Well, if that's what you need, Doris, I won't stand in your way. Doris felt a wave of relief wash over her, but a flicker of unease lingered. His reaction had been so calm, so controlled. She had expected protest, maybe even an argument, but instead, he had agreed without a hint of anger. Caleb leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he looked at her. So, this freedom, he said, his tone carefully measured, a faint edge to his voice that Doris couldn't quite place. I take it this would be a two-way street for both of us? Doris hesitated. She hadn't really considered Caleb's side of things. She had assumed he'd be content to let her explore, but now, looking at him, she felt a strange pang of worry. Well, yes, I guess, if that's what you want too, she replied. Caleb nodded again, his gaze steady. I appreciate that, Doris, and I think I understand what you're asking for. He let out a slow breath, then met her eyes. I'm fine with it. I want you to be happy. Doris forced a smile, trying to shake off the unease creeping into her chest. She had expected some resistance, maybe even an argument. Instead, she was met with Caleb's calm acceptance and the unsettling feeling that he was taking the agreement seriously, perhaps in ways she hadn't anticipated. Thank you, Caleb, she said softly. That means a lot. Caleb offered a small smile, but something in his gaze made Doris's stomach twist. She couldn't pinpoint it, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had somehow lost control of the situation, or that Caleb's calm reaction was hiding something she wasn't prepared for. A few days later, Doris and Teresa found themselves stepping into the vibrant, pulsing lights and thumping music of a downtown nightclub. The place was packed with people laughing, talking, and dancing beneath the flashing lights. The air was electric, and Doris could feel her nerves and excitement mixing together. Teresa grinned, giving Doris a playful nudge. You're finally here. How does it feel? She asked, her voice rising above the music. Doris laughed, but her voice was a little shaky. Honestly, I'm still processing everything. I told Caleb, and he agreed. No arguing, no anger. He was just so calm. Teresa raised an eyebrow. Wow, he sounds pretty open-minded. See? I told you he'd understand if you were honest. Doris nodded, trying to feel reassured. Yeah, he did, but it felt a bit strange. I almost expected him to push back, but he just accepted it. He even said he wanted me to be happy. She paused, a frown crossing her face. It was like he was too calm about it. Teresa chuckled. Probably because he's excited too. Guys like to act cool, but he's probably already thinking about his own possibilities. Trust me, this will be good for both of you. Doris tried to shake off her worry, smiling as she took a deep breath. So, what about you? Does your husband know you're out here with me tonight? A flash of hesitation crossed Teresa's face, but she quickly brushed it off, waving a hand dismissively. Oh, he's off on some hiking trip with his friends. We have an understanding, remember? No questions, just trust. Doris narrowed her eyes, curiosity piqued. You mean he doesn't ask where you go or who you're with? Teresa laughed lightly, taking Doris's hand as they navigated through the crowd toward the bar. Come on, Doris. Honesty is important. Sure, but that doesn't mean he needs every little detail. It's about freedom, remember? Doris felt a twinge of doubt. She thought honesty was part of the deal, but Teresa's confidence was infectious. Before she could dwell on it, Teresa ordered them cocktails and raised hers in a toast to freedom and new adventures. Doris clinked her glass with Teresa's, taking a long sip. The cocktails were sweet and strong, soon easing her nerves and leaving her feeling light and carefree. They made their way to the dance floor, laughing as the music took over. After a while, Doris felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a familiar face, Charlie, a colleague she had known for years but had only ever seen in the professional setting. Here, under the flashing lights, with a mischievous smile on his face, he looked different, charming, even a little dangerous. I didn't expect to see you here, he said, grinning. Doris returned the smile, feeling a thrill she hadn't felt in years. I could say the same for you. Charlie introduced his friend to Teresa, and soon the four of them were chatting and laughing, the night becoming more exhilarating with each passing minute. They ordered another round of drinks, and before long, Doris found herself fully immersed in the night, dancing, laughing, feeling completely alive. Eventually, the two pairs drifted apart, each couple finding their own way through the crowd. Doris and Charlie ended up in a quiet corner, their conversation becoming softer and more personal. Charlie leaned in, his voice warm. This is different, he said, his eyes on her. I've never seen this side of you. Doris felt a spark in her chest, excitement mixed with nerves. I guess I'm feeling different tonight, she replied softly, locking eyes with him. In that moment, everything felt simple, almost natural. Before she knew it, they had left the club, walking together with laughter filling the night air until they arrived at a small, quiet motel on the edge of town. Neither of them hesitated as they entered. For Doris, it was a night unlike any she had experienced, thrilling, liberating, everything she had been seeking. The next morning, as the sun streamed in through the window, Doris's excitement began to fade, replaced by a strange mix of satisfaction and lingering unease. She dressed quietly, glancing at Charlie as he slept. The adventure she had longed for was now a reality, but as she left the motel, she couldn't shake the thought of Caleb and the calm, unreadable look in his eyes. When Doris slipped quietly through the front door that morning, the house was empty and still. A wave of nervousness washed over her. She checked the bedroom, the kitchen, even the backyard, but Caleb was nowhere to be found. Feeling anxious, she dialed his number. He picked up after a few rings, his voice calm but brisk. "Hey, Doris," he said. "What's up?" "Caleb, where are you?" she asked, relieved just to hear his voice. "I'm at the office," he replied. "There's a new project I'm working on. It's going to take a lot of hours, probably for the next few weeks. I might even be tied up this weekend." Doris felt herself relax, though a pang of guilt mixed with the relief. "Okay, I just didn't see you this morning, and well, I was wondering." "Everything's fine," Caleb reassured her. "Just busy. I'll be home by dinner." Doris exhaled, feeling her heart settle. "Okay, take it easy." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting a warm glow through the living room windows, Doris heard Caleb's footsteps as he came through the door. She greeted him with a smile as he walked in, setting his briefcase down by the entryway. "Long day?" she asked, meeting his tired smile with one of her own. He nodded. "You could say that." He moved to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. Doris watched him carefully, unsure how to start but eager to gauge his feelings. She decided to ease into it. "So, how are you feeling about everything?" she asked lightly. Caleb looked over his glass at her, raising an eyebrow slightly. "Everything?" he repeated. She smiled sheepishly. "You know, the open marriage idea. Have you been? Well, are you getting anything out of it?" Caleb set down his glass, his expression thoughtful. "Honestly, Doris, I haven't had time to think about it," he said evenly. "This project is taking up every second. Maybe when things calm down a bit, I'll have more time to think about that side of things." Doris tried to mask her disappointment but managed to smile. "Oh, I guess that makes sense." Caleb shrugged before shifting the conversation. "Enough about me," he said, his gaze steady. "What about you? You and Teresa had a night out, didn't you?" Doris's heart raced, and for a moment, she considered telling him about Charlie, but she decided to keep things vague. "Yeah, just had some drinks, danced a bit, and then ended up at Teresa's place. Nothing too crazy," she said, hoping her tone seemed casual. Caleb watched her, his expression unreadable. "And how do you feel about it? Is this really what you wanted?" Doris hesitated, but the words spilled out before she could stop them. "Actually, yeah, I feel good. I mean, I know it's early, but it's like I have this new energy, this inspiration I haven't felt in a long time." Caleb's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place, but he smiled softly. "Well, I'm happy for you, Doris," he said calmly. "Really?" she asked, returning his smile, feeling a mix of relief and excitement. But in the back of her mind, something about his calm acceptance left her feeling a little unsettled. She had expected more, maybe a pushback or at least some reaction, but Caleb seemed perfectly at ease with it all. Over the next week, Doris found herself texting both Charlie and Teresa almost constantly. Charlie was charming, flirtatious, and didn't hold back in expressing his excitement over their night together. He mentioned he had something special planned for the weekend. A grown-up party, he said, would be unforgettable. Intrigued, Doris agreed, but decided to talk to Teresa first. She picked up her phone and dialed Teresa, feeling a mix of nervous excitement. "Hey Doris, getting ready for tomorrow?" Teresa answered right away. Doris laughed, but a bit of hesitation crept into her voice. "Sort of. Actually, I wanted to ask you about it. Charlie keeps talking about this party, and he made it sound different." "It'll be different, all right," Teresa replied with a chuckle. "Charlie's party is going to be incredible." Doris hesitated before adding, "But there's also Caleb. He's been so distant lately, buried in work. I just can't tell if he's actually okay with all of this or if he's just, I don't know, too distracted to care." Teresa laughed again. "Oh, Doris, trust me. Caleb is probably using work as an excuse to avoid admitting he's having his own fun. Men are like that. They hate admitting they have their own plans." Doris felt a pang of jealousy, but tried to shake it off. "Maybe you're right. I just wish he'd give me some kind of reaction." "Listen," Teresa said confidently, "you need to relax. Forget about Caleb and his work for the night. Focus on the fun. Charlie's party is going to be the perfect escape. Doris's curiosity piqued. All right, I'll try to. But Teresa, when you say fun, what do you mean exactly? Teresa laughed, a hint of mischief in her voice. Let's just say you'll probably pick up a few new terms, like Milk Brothers or the Captain's Wheel. Doris blinked, both intrigued and slightly embarrassed. The Captain's Wheel? What's that? Teresa laughed. Oh, you'll see. Let's just say it involves a few extra people. Just get ready for an unforgettable night. Doris hung up, her excitement growing as any remaining nerves melted away. This was the adventure she had been craving. When Saturday arrived, Doris told Caleb she'd be out with Teresa for the evening, framing it as a casual girls' night. Caleb barely looked up from his papers. Have fun, he said distractedly. Don't worry about me. I'll be here all night with this project. Doris felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. All right, just don't work too hard. Okay? Caleb nodded without looking up. Enjoy yourself, he said calmly, and Doris could barely hide the thrill that bubbled up inside her. This was it. She was stepping into something new and exhilarating, and Caleb's calm acceptance only made her feel like everything was falling into place. Later that evening, Doris and Teresa pulled up to Charlie's house, and the night stretched out before her like an untapped world of possibility. Charlie's house was impressive, with soft music drifting through the air as they walked up the pathway. She caught the warm glow of light spilling out from the backyard, where the pool sparkled. She hadn't expected a party like this, but there were already a dozen people there, including several men and a few unfamiliar women. As soon as Charlie saw her, he broke into a grin. Doris, glad you made it, he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. He gave Teresa a friendly hug before ushering them through the house toward the pool. Just so you know, he chuckled, the pool's fair game tonight. Did you bring a swimsuit? Doris's eyes widened. No, I had no idea there would even be a pool. Charlie laughed, shrugging with playful glint in his eyes. Well, underwear works fine as a swimsuit, or you can just go without. No judgments here, he winked. Doris felt her cheeks flush, but Teresa's enthusiasm was contagious. She immediately kicked off her shoes and gave Doris a reassuring smile. Come on, it's going to be fun, Teresa said, slipping off her dress to reveal her bra and underwear, then diving into the pool with a gleeful splash. Charlie poured her a drink, and Doris allowed herself to relax. The atmosphere was lighthearted, like a college party with people laughing, joking, and feeling completely uninhibited, just like Teresa. Music pulsed through the speakers, the lights glowed warmly, and drinks flowed freely as if no one had a care in the world. Doris felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as the night progressed. The laughter turned to flirtation, and soon a few games began. Someone suggested cheeky dares, and the playful teasing quickly escalated into more daring challenges. Couples swapped partners to dance, and others dared each other to strip off their clothes in the pool. Before long, the boundaries Doris had expected to exist were all but gone. Everyone was laughing and playing along, and she found herself swept up in the thrill. She kept glancing at Teresa, who was clearly enjoying the atmosphere and more than ready for the night to escalate. At one point, Charlie leaned in, his voice low as he wrapped an arm around her waist. What do you think, Doris? Ready for a new experience? His hand rested comfortably on her back, and his eyes twinkled as he hinted at things beyond her usual comfort zone. Doris hesitated, feeling her pulse quicken. The energy of the night was magnetic, and she found herself drawn to the idea, tempted by the unknown. I think so, she said softly, her voice full of curiosity. As the group naturally broke into pairs and trios, Doris found herself in a circle of unfamiliar faces, some laughing, others openly flirting, the energy hinting at where the night was heading. She looked over at Teresa, who was grinning and already leaning into the atmosphere. Teresa met her gaze and raised her glass in a silent toast, as if to say, here we go. Just as things started to turn more intimate, Doris felt her anticipation falter. Looking around, a strange unease crept over her. The idea of exploring new things had seemed thrilling, but with multiple hands reaching out toward her, her pulse raced, not with excitement, but with an unexpected discomfort. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage, and pulled away slightly. Actually, I don't think I'm ready for this. Not yet, she said gently but firmly, starting to pull her clothes back on. A murmur of disappointment rippled through the group, but most were understanding. Charlie gave her a sympathetic smile. That's all right, Doris, he said warmly. Maybe next time. It takes a little getting used to. Teresa, however, wasn't ready to give up. Come on, Doris, you're having a great time. Just relax. You'll love it if you give it a chance. But Doris shook her head, her unease now clear. I really can't, Teresa. I need a little more time. Charlie put a reassuring hand on Teresa's shoulder. It's fine. Let Doris take her time, he said, then gave Teresa a sly smile. Besides, he added, I think there are still plenty of people here who would be more than happy to entertain you. Sensing the shift, Teresa laughed and shrugged, quickly moving on. Within moments, she was back in the circle, and the night continued, growing even more adventurous than before. Doris watched from the doorway as Teresa and the others embraced the full, uninhibited energy of the party. The laughter turned into rhythmic movements, and the atmosphere became charged with energy. Feeling out of place, Doris wandered into a quiet room, pouring herself a glass of wine. She sank into a chair and sipped slowly, listening to the muffled sounds of the party from the other room. Her mind wandered to Caleb, his calm, unreadable expression lingering in her thoughts. When Doris told Caleb she'd be spending the night with Teresa, she thought of his steady support, his calm acceptance of her wishes. But for the first time, she began to wonder if she truly understood what he was thinking. Part of her wanted to leave the party, but she stayed, sipping her drink and lost in thoughts she hadn't fully anticipated. A few hours later, the party began to wind down. The group slowly emerged from the darker rooms, gathering around for snacks and drinks, their laughter and conversation filling the air. Teresa spotted Doris sitting alone and wandered over, her smile wide and her cheeks flushed. Hey, she said, nudging Doris playfully. Everything all right? You seemed like you were having a quiet moment. Doris forced a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. Just not sure that kind of thing is for me. Teresa laughed and rolled her eyes. Everyone needs a little warm-up, that's all. Trust me, next time, you'll feel right at home. But as dawn began to break, Doris felt a strange unease creep into her chest. People started to head out, exchanging casual goodbyes, as if it had all been just another ordinary gathering. Doris slipped out quietly and drove home in silence, the thrill of the night replaced by a nagging sense of dread. When she arrived, the house was dark and still. She sighed with relief, assuming Caleb must still be asleep. Tiptoeing through the living room and up the stairs to the bedroom, she was greeted by an unsettling sight. The bed was neatly made, and there was no sign of Caleb. A quick glance around the room confirmed something was wrong. Some of his clothes were gone, and his side of the bed was empty. Panic surged within her. Her eyes landed on a set of papers on the nightstand. The heavy black letters on top read divorce. A wave of shock hit her, followed by a sense of dread. She picked up the papers, her hands trembling. This can't be happening, she thought. But everything about Caleb's calmness over the past few weeks now made an awful kind of sense. He'd quietly planned everything, gathering what he needed, then vanishing without a trace. Doris tried calling him, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. Her heart raced as she tried again, but there was still no answer. Over the following days, she called countless times, left messages, and sent texts, pleading with him to talk. But Caleb remained unreachable, a ghost slipping from her life without a trace. The only communication she received was from his lawyer, with responses that were formal and detached, leaving her feeling more alone and confused. At work, Doris noticed her colleagues distancing themselves from her. Their usual friendliness was replaced with cold silence, and soon, she learned why. Caleb had quietly gathered evidence of her relationship with Charlie, including texts, photos, and details about the party. As the news spread, it became clear that her conservative workplace culture was unforgiving of scandals, especially those that blurred professional boundaries. Her supervisor called her into the office, their expression grim, and informed her that her conduct was under review. The job she'd dedicated herself to was now slipping through her fingers. When Doris finally faced her day in court, the full extent of Caleb's meticulous preparation became painfully clear. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Private text messages, intimate photos, and detailed notes from a private investigator. Caleb had tracked her every movement, documenting her nights out with Teresa, her flirtations with Charlie, and even the night she had arrived at Charlie's house for the party. Doris sat in stunned silence, her mind racing, feeling the weight of betrayal, entrapment, and foolishness. As she glanced around the room, she could almost feel Caleb's presence behind her, his steady calmness having made her own actions seem reckless in comparison. She had never expected this, never imagined that he had been so thorough in watching her. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Caleb had known all along. While she had been consumed by her own desires and ambitions, he had been quietly observing, pretending to focus on work, all the while gathering ammunition. The lawyer for the opposing side presented the evidence, one damning piece after another. Ms. Johnson, we have here text messages between you and Mr. Miller, which include flirtatious and suggestive exchanges, the lawyer stated, presenting the documents to the judge. And here, photos taken from a private investigator show your presence at Mr. Miller's residence during a party where you and Mr. Miller were seen in a compromising situation. Doris could barely hold back the tears. She couldn't believe it. I never thought it would come to this, she whispered under her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. After a few moments of silence, her lawyer turned to her, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. Doris, I know this looks bad, but we'll figure this out. Just focus on staying calm. But Doris couldn't calm down. The weight of Caleb's calculated strategy was too much to bear. As she glanced at the prosecutor, she caught a glimpse of his expression, cold, detached. There was no sympathy for her, only judgment. Outside the courtroom, Doris found herself alone for a few minutes. She leaned against the wall, trying to gather her thoughts. Then, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Caleb. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling as she read his words. I hope you realize now what you've done. I've seen it all. You chose this path, Doris. She stared at the screen, feeling the tears well up in her eyes. I didn't think it would come to this. She had wanted to explore, to break free, but she had never imagined it would destroy everything. She had been too wrapped up in her own needs to see what was happening to her marriage, to see that Caleb had been quietly biding his time. The next day, after the court proceedings, she tried to call him, hoping for some kind of reconciliation, a chance to explain. But his voicemail greeted her, and there was no reply to her frantic messages. She left a final voicemail, her voice cracking. Caleb, please, if you're listening, please just talk to me. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't think it would hurt you like this. Please, just talk to me. But her words hung in the air, unanswered, just like the guilt and regret that had been suffocating her since this all started. The quiet storm she had failed to recognize had now swept everything away, leaving her with nothing but the ruins of a life she had once thought would last. The divorce was nothing short of brutal. Every detail of Doris's actions was laid bare, scrutinized and dissected in front of everyone. Her private messages with Charlie, the flirtations she had thought were harmless, her nights out with Teresa, everything was exposed. There was no room left for privacy, no safe space where she could shield herself from the relentless fallout. The ripple effect was immediate. Doris lost her job quickly, her employer unable to overlook the scandal that had come to light. Her professional reputation was destroyed. Charlie, too, was not spared. He was dismissed almost as swiftly, his own career shattered in the wake of the revelations. The scandal spread through their tight-knit, conservative workplace like wildfire, poisoning the relationships Doris had worked years to build. Friends turned into critics, co-workers whispered in hallways, and the once familiar faces now looked at her with disdain. She was the center of gossip, the topic of every conversation, and the shame was overwhelming. Both Doris and Charlie became cautionary tales, their mistakes serving as a grim reminder of what happens when boundaries are crossed in a world that values secrecy and tradition above all. Doris felt like a pariah, cast out from the world she had known, with nowhere to turn and no one left to defend her. The most devastating blow came from Teresa's side. Caleb, ever calm and calculating, had quietly sent all the evidence to Teresa's husband, Russell. Doris was horrified to learn that Teresa had been lying the entire time. Russell had no knowledge of the so-called open marriage or his wife's secret affairs with other men. The shock of it hit Doris hard, as she realized the full extent of Teresa's deception. When Russell confronted Teresa, everything she had built came crashing down. They were in their living room, the tension thick as Russell threw down the folder with the evidence. Teresa, what is all this? Russell's voice was tight with anger and disbelief. How could you do this? To me? To us? Teresa stood frozen, her face draining of color as the weight of his words sank in. She had no defense, no way to explain away the damning proof. It's not what you think, Russell, she stammered, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. Not what I think, Russell repeated, his voice rising. You've been lying to me for months, and now I find out this? You've been living a completely different life while I've been in the dark. How long did you think I wouldn't find out? His eyes were wide with hurt, each word more cutting than the last. Teresa's shoulders slumped, and her usual confidence cracked. I didn't want you to know, she whispered, a weak attempt at an explanation. Well, now I know, Russell shot back, the finality in his tone unmistakable. And I can't just ignore this. You've betrayed me, Teresa. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Teresa could feel the floor shifting beneath her as Russell turned and walked out of the room. Her world, which had felt so secure just moments ago, was falling apart. The fallout was swift, and as Russell moved to file for divorce, the scandal spread like wildfire through Teresa's social circles. Friends, once loyal and supportive, turned against her. The tight-knit group she had once been a part of now whispered behind her back, their judgments sharper than ever. Teresa, humiliated and furious, cut off all contact with Doris, blaming her, and Caleb, for her downfall. You had to ruin everything, didn't you? Teresa seethed in her final message to Doris. I didn't ask for this, but now my life is destroyed. This is all your fault. You and Caleb ruined me. Doris's phone buzzed with Teresa's angry words, and she let out a long breath, knowing that no amount of regret or apology would undo the damage that had been done. Doris's circle quickly followed suit, growing distant and cold. Friends, neighbors, even family members who had once embraced her now turned away. She noticed the subtle shifts in behavior, an awkward pause when she entered a room, averted eyes, and forced smiles that never reached their eyes. The familiar warmth from those she had known for years had been replaced with a palpable chill. People she had worked with for so long now seemed to keep their distance, their once friendly gestures replaced by tense nods or fleeting glances. It wasn't just the people she barely knew who distanced themselves. Even those closest to her seemed to recoil. Her parents, who had always been supportive, barely returned her calls. When she visited them one afternoon, her mother, usually warm and comforting, greeted her with a stiff embrace. We're just concerned about you, honey, she said, her voice laced with judgment, as though Doris had become someone unrecognizable to her. At work, her colleagues no longer invited her to lunch, and the once easy camaraderie evaporated. During meetings, the room felt emptier when she entered, as though the weight of her scandal filled the air. One of her old friends from work, Sarah, who had always been chatty and engaging, now avoided eye contact. Their casual conversations, once full of laughter, had turned into forced exchanges, if they spoke at all. Caleb, who had played the role of the betrayed husband with such quiet dignity, had done the impossible. He had earned the sympathy of everyone. He became the picture of grace, while Doris's mistakes were laid bare for all to see. Those who had been closest to her now sided with Caleb, as if they too had silently judged her and found her wanting. It felt as though there wasn't a single person left who hadn't turned their back on her. Even the neighbors, once friendly faces, now avoided her on the street. When she passed by their homes, they would suddenly turn away or pretend to be busy with something else. Each day, the distance between Doris and the world she once knew seemed to grow wider. One evening, Doris managed to reach Caleb for what she hoped would be a final conversation. She sat across from him, feeling the weight of her actions press down on her like a storm ready to break. Her heart ached, and tears filled her eyes as she looked at him, desperate. Caleb, please, I made a mistake. A huge one. I thought it would be something beautiful, something that would bring us closer in some strange way. I only slept with Charlie once, and at that party, I couldn't go through with it. It was all just a mistake. Please, forgive me. Caleb exhaled a long, deep sigh, his eyes filled with something Doris couldn't quite place. Maybe pity, or perhaps relief that it was finally over. His gaze softened, but there was no warmth in it, only exhaustion. Doris, he said, his voice steady, his tone calm but devoid of any affection. When a woman proposes an open marriage, it usually means certain ideas have already taken root in her mind. Ideas that put a nail in the marriage long before anyone notices. And you weren't honest with me. You wanted to keep things hidden, to live halfway in that world and halfway out. Doris's throat tightened as she tried to absorb his words. She knew they were true, too true. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Caleb's gaze never wavered, his face a mask of controlled emotion. I think that's the part that hurts the most. You weren't honest with me, even when I gave you the space to be. I trusted you, Doris, and you betrayed that trust in a way that can't be fixed. He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. I wanted to believe that you were still the person I married, but that person isn't here anymore. You've already made up your mind, whether you realize it or not. Doris sat in stunned silence, the realization sinking in deeper than she had expected. The quiet certainty in his voice left no room for argument, no chance for redemption. I never wanted this, she whispered. But it was clear that her words held no weight anymore. Caleb looked at her one last time, his expression almost unreadable. I don't think we can fix this, Doris. Not anymore. You've already made your choices. Doris bowed her head, feeling the crushing weight of finality in his words. His tone remained steady, but it cut through her like a blade. I wanted it to end cleanly, that's all, Caleb continued, his voice calm but carrying a quiet resolve. Maybe I went too far. Maybe it seems cruel. But the fact that you felt you had to hide those details from me told me everything I needed to know. He paused, letting out another sigh, his eyes distant as he spoke the words that sealed their fate. I don't think we can fix this, Doris. I really don't. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Doris felt as though the world was closing in on her, the walls pressing in tighter with every breath. Her chest felt tight as she processed the reality of his words, words that she had hoped would never come. The tears that had once come so easily now felt foreign, as if even they knew there was no longer any room for them. She had thought that the affair, the risky venture into something new, would somehow bring her closer to Caleb, ignite a spark that had long been buried in their marriage. But instead, it had done the opposite. The experiment she had believed would be a path to self-discovery and freedom had only served to expose the cracks she had been too blind to see in herself. She had been searching for something outside of her marriage, thinking it would fill the void she couldn't understand. But in the process, she had shattered the very thing she had once held dear. I never meant for any of this to happen, Doris whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking any louder would shatter her completely. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes, and Doris understood that it wasn't just the marriage that was broken. It was trust, and perhaps even the person she thought she was. The realization was brutal, and it settled in her chest with a finality that left no room for hope. The path she had chosen had led her here, to this moment where there was nothing left but the weight of her mistakes and the quiet aftermath of everything she had lost. As Doris walked away from Caleb that night, she felt a deep emptiness settle within her. The world around her seemed distant, muffled, as though she were moving through a haze. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, as if gravity itself had turned against her, pulling her deeper into a pit of despair. Her thoughts churned with relentless guilt, the weight of her actions pressing down on her chest like an insurmountable burden. In the days that followed, Doris found herself trapped in a spiral of hopelessness. The empty apartment, once filled with the promise of new beginnings, now felt suffocating, the silence echoing her shame. Her friends, her family, those she once believed would offer comfort, had turned their backs on her, just as she had feared. No one reached out. No one checked on her. She was utterly alone. She tried to keep herself busy, to fill the silence with distractions, but nothing worked. The void inside her seemed insatiable, and no matter how many hours she spent at work or how many glasses of wine she drank to numb the pain, the hollow feeling never went away. Each night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, consumed by thoughts of her mistakes, the choices she had made, and the irreparable damage she had caused. Her mind replayed every moment of her betrayal, every lie she had told, every secret she had kept. It wasn't long before the sadness turned into something darker, something more consuming. She stopped eating. She stopped leaving the house. The once vibrant woman who had believed in the possibility of reinvention now felt like a shell of herself, a person she no longer recognized. Her body grew weaker from lack of care, and her mind became increasingly clouded with despair. One day, Doris collapsed at work. Her colleagues rushed to her aid, but it was clear to them that something was terribly wrong. She was shaking uncontrollably, her breath coming in short, erratic gasps, as if the weight of her emotions had finally become too much for her to bear. The hospital called it a breakdown, a severe depressive episode. It didn't take long for the doctors to suggest that Doris needed professional help, that she couldn't continue to suffer in isolation. Her family, still reeling from her actions, hesitated at first, but eventually, they agreed that she needed to be admitted to a mental institution. In the sterile, clinical halls of the facility, Doris sat in a room that felt as cold and empty as her heart. The bright fluorescent lights hummed above her, and the constant sound of footsteps in the hallways did little to drown out the deafening silence in her mind. She had hoped that time might heal her, that somehow, she could find a way to make peace with herself. But as the days dragged on, it became clear that healing wasn't something she could control. The damage she had caused, the lives she had torn apart, couldn't be undone. She had no one left to turn to, no one to remind her that she was worth saving. The walls of the institution became her only constant. The staff, kind yet distant, tried to engage her, to encourage her to speak about her feelings, but she remained silent. The weight of her grief was too heavy to voice. Instead, she spent her days staring at the white walls, lost in her own thoughts, consumed by the relentless ache of regret. Doris knew she had learned a bitter lesson, but it didn't bring her solace. She no longer believed in redemption. Time had not healed her. It had only magnified the chasm between the person she once was and the broken woman she had become. She was trapped, not just in the institution, but in the prison of her own mind. And as each day passed, the hope she once had for peace with herself seemed to slip further and further away. All that remained were the echoes of her mistakes, reverberating through the silence of her isolation. Caleb had moved on. After the divorce, he took some time to himself, carefully navigating the emotional aftermath of the wreckage Doris had left behind. But soon enough, he found peace in new beginnings. He met someone, a woman who understood his need for stability, for honesty, for a love without the baggage of betrayal. They were drawn to each other in a way that felt effortless, and Caleb, always one to appreciate calm and consistency, let his heart open again. Within a year, Caleb married her. They chose to live in France, a place he had always admired for its simplicity and charm, away from the chaos of his past. The quiet streets of a small town outside Paris became his new home, where the weight of old memories slowly faded into the backdrop of his new life. His days were spent enjoying the peace of his surroundings, his nights filled with conversation and laughter with his wife. Though he never spoke to Doris again, Caleb felt a sense of closure in his decision to leave the past behind. The past, with its pain and its lessons, no longer had the same grip on him. France was a new chapter, one where he could finally breathe without the haunting weight of betrayal on his shoulders. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.